afternoon, good evening. Hi, everybody. My name is Christopher Bennett. I'm the executive producer and the head of marketing for the Vancouver Film School. I have the pleasure and the distinct privilege of being your host tonight for what is going to be one of the coolest people you're ever going to meet. It was so important that we kicked it off with someone that spoke to so many of the important values and that are foundational at Vancouver Film School. And one of those is being a pioneer. One of those is about somebody who is looking at the future of their industry, not just the craftsmanship and the heritage of where that industry of storytelling originated from. And there could be nobody more appropriate if you want to look at the world of character acting, of stunt choreographer, of director or filmmaking. All of those titles would be only just a little bit appropriate, and I think you're going to discover why Eric Jacobus is a fascinating guy, but you don't need to hear it from me. Let me first throw up a video and let me show you this. Perfect. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would help me welcome Mr. Eric Jacobus. Hey. Oh, these guys are great. Oh, you got fans. Let's do a quick rapid fire. I want to get people familiar with Eric Jacobus before he was a professional. Help put a few things into context. It might surprise a lot of people as well. Place of birth?
Redding, California, just south of Oregon.
And do you consider yourself an actor or a stunt professional, a filmmaker or a director?
I would call myself a stuntman and a filmmaker. And I always bracket that by saying, I don't do the daredevil stunts. That's for a certain class of stunt guys. And there's a lot that's to be respected. I'm more in the combat class. I can fall here and there, and I would fall for you if I wasn't all mic'd up, obviously. I'm fully padded right now, too. I just walk around like that. But yeah, I still consider myself a stuntman and a filmmaker.
What was public school like for Eric Jacobus? What were you like as a kid?
It was pretty quiet. It was really quiet, normal family, lifted weights a lot. I was strong. I could always arm wrestle people. I was always good at that. I could always beat people at arm wrestling. Please do not challenge me. I don't have time to arm wrestle everybody.
It's a telltale sign.
Yeah, sure. I liked doing magic shows when I was a kid, but I was really bad at it, right? So I'm just not very good with my hands with this stuff, and so I'd fumble, and people would laugh at me, and I would kind of play that off, like, okay, well, I guess that's the show. That's messing up magic. So,
do you think that high school was any different? Were there evidence or signs that you might be leaning towards being a creative or a storyteller in high school? What were you like then?
I dabbled a little bit with filmmaking. I dabbled a little bit in martial arts, but I actually thought I was going to be a programmer and maybe a game maker someday because that was my first job.
So just so that everyone understands this, having just seen your demo reel, you were a programmer. You were kind of a techie kind of kid. You were into the gadgets.
Yeah, at 15, I took up a job programming Visual Basic for Excel and doing PHP, MySQL, all that. I made web pages for the community college. And I had kind of the computer bug up until that point. I played a lot of video games as a kid. But I was really interested in trying to make the computer do what I wanted it to do. Kind of like what a mechanic would do for a car, which is what my dad did.
Would a 15, if you were to go back in time and you could see that 15 or 16-year-old version of you, would that teenage Eric be surprised by what you're doing now professionally?
Yeah, I think so.
So this was not something that you always knew you were going to go do?
I had no idea what I was going to do with, I think I always had the bug to make movies, somehow do movies somehow, but I had no idea how to execute that. And at the time, my influences were Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I'm too small. I can't pull my shirt off and do that. I can't pull off a good one-liner. I had no idea how to execute that.
Is it a myth, having been in the industry as long as you have been now and doing what you do, that you need to be a bulky, big, strong person? Is there a direct correlation to size and physical prowess with stunt work? Because when I talk to you, I'm kind of leading the witness. I don't think it is.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that there's an inverse relationship a lot of the time. Guys that bulk up for looks, they're not very strong. Guys that power lift, and I was doing a lot of heavy weightlifting, but I never quite looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger at all. I just looked nothing like that guy. But I could still, do more pull-ups than people in my class. I think that myth of the male perfect body, which kind of was created in the 80s due to steroids and Mr. Olympia and all that stuff, it's a myth. I hope it dies a quick death, frankly. No, I do, because it's body shaming for males.
Sure, fair enough.
And we do it to ourselves.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Martial arts plays an important part in your youth, and I think you really understated how you dabbled in martial arts. I mean, this is a guy who has been 8 different characters in the new Mortal Kombat 11 game. I can't believe I've played you. You didn't just dabble.
It's kind of scary.
How much?
It's like a voodoo doll.
Yeah, it's kind of cool,
Yeah.
but weird.
I was wondering why I was in my room the other night.
How much martial arts were you doing in the early parts of your training?
The early years, not so much. I did gymnastics. I did some diving, springboard diving. But I stopped doing martial arts because they put me in they accidentally booked me into a class with a bunch of toddlers. It was really embarrassing. So I quit for a while. And then when I started picking up on this passion of making movies, I wanted to make action movies, but I wanted to know how to move properly. And that's really when the obsession started.
That's right. And I want to throw to a clip now. This blew my mind. One of the things you always want to ask somebody who is really passionate about storytelling and a creative is, who are your influences? And certainly, when we got to the core of this early in some conversations, I learned the answer, and this is what it is.
That's the master.
You herald him. You call him the master. What did that mean to you? Why was that so inspirational to you?
Because Chaplin and the people of his generation, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy, the Little Rascals, W.C. Fields, these guys could tell stories with their bodies because they came up in the silent era. And all they had was their physicality. Now, of course, on a live stage you were singing, but when it came to films, you had no sound a lot of the time to deal with. So they would rely solely on their bodies to tell stories. And being somebody who kind of fumbled with magic, and I could never do a one-liner properly, and I was always kind of short for words with girls, and when guys would bully me, I never had anything to say. I could kind of like act my way out of it. And I always saw myself in these guys.
That's really interesting to me. I would not have assumed that, and I think, as we talk this evening about the art of violence, as you call it, and the physicality of it, certainly there are roots there, and I think we're going to find with a few other things we look at tonight that certainly the physical work, the stunt work has come a long way. So that inspires you, and you are at one moment a high school kid who is really interested in programming and digital technology. When did you know you wanted to go into stunt work?
Being raised on vaudeville films like that, it sort of trained me to see human storytelling through physicality, through human motion. And American martial art films they didn't quite do that in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, they had these great martial artists, but it's like their bodies didn't tell stories that way. But when I saw a Jackie Chan film, way late, by the way, 10 years late, I was in a small town, we didn't really see much of this stuff. And I saw one on TV, and when I saw how Jackie Chan and Hong Kong stunt guys moved and how they used their bodies to tell stories in this really interesting and new way, that's when my life totally changed.
I'd like to throw that clip up. I want everyone to have a look at that. There is something really magic that happens when you look at the history of combat and fighting in films, and this was a pivotal moment. I'd like to cue up that film and take a look at it right here. If Chaplin inspired you as a little boy, Jackie Chan activated you, didn't it? That was that particular scene when you talk about it. That was the one that made you go, I got to do this. Was that the one, the moment?
That's the one. And the reason is that in that entire movie, that scene, and really his career throughout the 80s and 90s, is that like the camera never lies with those scenes. It's like even the woman, they threw her through a table, you see her face, you see her reaction, she's on the ground, you see Jackie hits the glass, there's no lying. There's no cutaways to a stunt double, there's no people flying around all wire to hide the fact that they can't jump. There's none, and there's
or
no
fly.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's no bad camera work to hide bad form, there's no bad editing to hide a miss, it's all there. And that is pretty much the same thing Chaplin was doing. It's practically the same thing. It's just a little bit, it's with sound.
Why does it drive you crazy that there is not an Oscar category for fight choreography? When you look at masterpiece movements like that in so many of the films that we've been watching together as you've been teaching me a bit about it, what's your reaction? What does your industry, do your colleagues, what's the sentiment on that?
Well, they feel like, just like how you have best sound design, why don't you have best choreography,
What do you think? Should they do it? I think it's yeah. Can anybody be a stunt professional? Can anybody do this kind of acting?
Yeah. In fact, I think some people stop themselves short because they have limitations. And that's actually the opposite of what should happen. Sometimes your limitations are going to be what make you extremely marketable. I mean, if you have some interesting quirk about how you move, if you have a certain trait that makes you very different, sets you apart from the rest of the world, you should capitalize off of that. Sometimes it takes someone to come in and kind of swoop in and spot you and give you a chance. But a lot of the time, I mean, you have the means to go and make this stuff happen yourself, and that's what I had. Is I had the means to just go and make movies, you know, and I did it.
And let's talk about that. This is another interesting thing, and it's so important to anyone who wants to break into the industry, behind the camera, in front of the camera. What was your first audition like? How did you get your first gig?
I never got a single job from submitting a resume, and I never got a single acting job by doing an audition.
How'd you do it?
I made content and I got found.
So you owe YouTube a great deal of
It was before
credit.
YouTube.
How does somebody do that?
Make it and put it up there. You set yourself apart. I mean, that's what we were doing. We found this thing where we said, we were watching Jackass in the late 90s, right? We were inspired by these guys that just took cameras out back and just did crazy stuff, right? But then I was watching these Hong Kong movies at the same time, and I would review these things on my website. And I said, I know how these fights are made now. Why don't we do the Jackass thing, but we do it with Hong Kong fights? We put that together, and we just went at it full time. And we just kept on working on the craft. First 100 short films we did were terrible. Terrible. And we'd always ask for honest feedback, and I loved the feedback. And other people would do it too. And this was back on forums, before there was YouTube, before any of that stuff. We'd share sound effects. And that's how we got better, and that's how we started setting ourselves apart.
What's the chemistry for someone who wants to be successful in your line of work? Is it 50% acting ability, 50% physical skill or capability? Is it 60-40? Is there other ingredients? What would you say is the makeup? Because, you know, when you talk about it, you said just the other night that it's not as easy. Fighters don't make good actors.
A lot of the time, fighters make terrible stuntmen.
Why?
Because if you're a trained martial artist and you're trained to kill, or you're trained in just these moves and just move like this, how do you train yourself to lose in a fight? Right? I mean, if you're a fighter, if you're a trained killer, now let's say you're a knife fighter, right? Okay, great. You audition. Yeah, I'm a great knife fighter. People say, yeah, he's a great knife fighter. He's good with a knife. Here's the knife. Okay, I got the knife. Here's your choreography. You're going to go da 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 like this. Great. And then the actor's going to throw a punch. You go da da da. Okay, great. And he throws a punch, and he stabs him in the neck. Sorry, that's my training. Right? I mean, these things happen.
Yeah.
So,
I'll bet.
yeah, and you know, and that's the extreme.
Yeah.
I went to the extreme.
Yeah.
But you know, for example, as an MMA fighter, if you want to transition into doing stunts, you have to learn how to react to a punch, and you have to learn to react to a punch without looking like you're waiting for a punch to happen, right? So you have to be in the middle of it, and then you get hit. You have to like plan your loss. It's like throwing a fight, but all the time.
Yeah. Last year, something tragic took place on the set of a major motion picture being filmed here in Vancouver. I'm sure many people read about it. The stunt industry lost a great professional. You know, it's not an easy job. How do you reconcile going to work every day knowing the potential for damage or long-term injury, the punishment? What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You know, like,
No,
how do
look,
you?
look, I mean, if you look at my
how do you
body,
do that?
if you look at my body of work, I'm not risking my life. Those people risk their lives, right? Those people do. That's like the really hard stuff where you're not really seen. You're a person with a helmet on doing a bike stunt, trying to do a slide, a miscalculation, and it goes askew. That stuff is very different. For me, it's an issue of, okay, how do I keep on doing 8-hour days, for example, doing motion capture?
Yeah.
How do I keep doing that with, okay, I've got this shoulder injury. How do I keep doing this with the shoulder injury, you know? And that's always the question. And like, what, am I gonna fall on my head today and, you know, lose hearing for the rest of the week? You know, like, and stuff like that, it happens, you know?
And maybe that's a great jumping point, Eric, to talk about this other place you go into as the industry matures and time goes by. You're doing, you know, really incredible stuff inspired by guys like Jackie Chan. And then we get to this new place in the industry where something really remarkable happens. And I'd like to put a clip up right now. I'd like you to watch this for a second. I want to talk about what this meant for the new world that you've been a part of since.
Because of you, Mr. Anderson, we're here to take from you what you tried to take from us. Purpose.
What's happening to him?
Don't know.
Yes, that's it. It'll be over soon.
That film was pivotal, and it meant something to you. And what does it say to you? What does it mean?
That was the time in the Matrix. That was Matrix Reloaded. In the Matrix was the time when Hollywood adopted the Hong Kong filmmaking model for a moment, right? And there was a brief moment in time when all these Hong Kong stars like Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, Michelle Yeoh, Yuen Woo-ping, Jet Li, they all came over in the time period of the handover when Hong Kong was going to go to mainland China in 1997. So that's when you had Rush Hour, that's when you had Martial Law, that's when you had Lethal Weapon 4, you had Tomorrow Never Dies, and you had The Matrix with Yuen Woo-ping. And Yuen Woo-ping, with the Wachowskis, what they allowed Yuen Woo-ping to do is run the shoot the way that you would run a shoot in Hong Kong, except with $50 million thrown at you or whatever the budget was. And so you had a Hollywood film that shot its fights like a Hong Kong movie. You notice that there's no lying again in there, like Keanu is doing that stuff, and it's all very clear, it's not hiding anything. And people remember those fights. And everyone still remembers the fights from The Matrix. And it's like, it's hard to remember a kung fu fight in America since then. It's really hard to remember one.
It's like there's a, like you said, this cultural wave and an influence in Hollywood becomes so prevalent that you start to see it in all these other, you know, even what Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was able to achieve.
Same idea.
And you find all of a sudden now North American audiences are starving for it. And all of a sudden this kind of movement, and you know, when we've talked about it, it's almost like we've turned great actors have learned to become great fighters, and these great fighters have become great actors, and all of them are dancing. And there is a real fantastic, you know, do you how much do you pay attention to true dance and choreography? I see it even in a lot of your movements. There's a real fluidity to the way you move. Does that play a part?
It depends on what you're trying to do, right? So in the late 90s and year 2000, you could get away with that kind of choreography because at the time, you know, martial art choreography, we were still sort of before MMA. So the average person on the street didn't know what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was. But we had this sort of moment where, okay, we have this foreign thing coming, let's make a kung fu movie. And it's all very, it's like the moves look good, but it's like they're not real. It's like it's like ritualized, right? It's like a highly ritualized form of fighting. And that worked at the time because our concept of violence was very stable. It was predictable. Fight scenes were still seen as foreign. You know, martial arts was still kind of a foreign concept aside from the Karate Kid and the B-movie industry. There wasn't much in terms of, you know, Hollywood films, these major films with martial arts. It was still foreign. I mean, in my hometown, we were making movies around that time. We were doing martial arts, and some guy came out of his garage and said, "Hey, what y'all doing?" So we're making a martial art movie, a kung fu movie. He's like, "Kung fu, like Chuck Norris?" Right? Now that guy knows what a triangle choke is. That guy knows what an osotogari is. That guy knows MMA because he watches it at the bar every weekend. It's a totally different culture. So back then, it was still very ritualized and foreign.
So when you are, putting pieces together and you're working on these things for the films, how do you approach it?
Well,
how do you begin that to bring that to life?
Yeah, I mean, I did if I can mention the Indian film I worked on. I was called in to do action direction on an Indian film called Man Who Feels No Pain. It's coming out soon. And the director wanted me to do something that was kind of like it was a fun movie. He wanted
Bollywood.
It's Bollywood, yeah. But he wanted something a little bit different. He didn't want people flying around on wires and doing superhero things. This is a movie about a kid that can't feel pain, and he goes on an adventure. And I jumped at it, and because I knew that this is the perfect opportunity to make a Bollywood movie without wires, and where the lead actors could do all their own stunts. And so the way that I looked at it was that we have this time right now where Bollywood is really trying to compete internationally with American action films, with Chinese action films. Okay, let's make a film that can really compete with them, right? And not just be this purely Bollywood fun thing where people put the fights on YouTube and laugh at them. I don't want people to laugh at the fights in this movie. I want people to say like, dang, that actor can really do that? That's cool. That inspires me, right? That actor's telling a story with his body in an interesting way, kind of like Jackie Chan did, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of...
And do you write, where does one begin? I mean, this is an audience filled with actors and screenwriters and filmmakers and producers. We all know how we begin a story with a beginning, middle, end. How does someone in fight and combat do that?
It's the same. Like every fight has a beginning, middle, and end. I think actually, the thing I took away from Save the Cat, I'm a terrible screenwriter, but I did take away the book Save the Cat, they do the 15 story beats. I apply those to every fight scene I do. Every fight scene now. It's got a beginning, middle, end, act 1, act 2, act 3. There's the turning point, the midpoint, bad guys close, and I do the whole thing for every fight. And I always tell a fight that way. Otherwise, your fight is it's called shoe leather. I mean, otherwise it's just movement like this, right? If it's just this, then nothing's happening. You lose people within 30 seconds.
In a fight sequence, can beautiful mistakes happen? We see so often with great actors and directors, sometimes, what's not on the script and what can happen between two actors can be incredible and sort of these unplanned moments. Can that ever happen in fighting, or does it have to be technical? Does it have to be precise?
There's a very fine balance right there. And there's a movie called Wheels on Meals Jackie Chan did, where Jackie Chan was fighting Benny Urquidez in this fight. And I wish I'd heard it. It looks like they're trying to kill each other, and it's because their styles were so vastly different. Bruce Lee had this happen too on one of his first films, The Big Boss. He fights in Thailand. He fought against the fight choreographer in the movie, but Bruce Lee was kind of doing his own choreography, which was way beyond this guy. And so Bruce brought this new style of kicking high kicks, and this kung fu guy was doing kung fu. And so you can bet that the two of them behind the scenes were fighting it out all the time about, well, you should be sticking to traditional kung fu, Bruce. And Bruce saying, no, I'm kicking to the head because it looks good on camera. We're going to see which one wins out. And that fight is dynamite. That kind of stuff explodes off the screen. Those kinds of things are not accidents necessarily, but you should, as a choreographer, I always try and harness stuff like that. I always try and harness the two opposing people. Absolutely.
There's another clip I want to throw up here, and I want to talk a little bit about violence and the improvisation of violence and what you think of that. Let's throw that clip up, please. Is this where we are today in this kind of combat, of fight, violent storytelling? Is it the more brutal and realistic? I mean, who hasn't watched a film or a TV series now where bones must be bent in the opposite direction? Shattered, everything imaginable. The human body is being, or seemingly, brutalized. Is that another influence and speaks to a genre or where we are, or what is that about? What do you think of that?
You know, when I was a Hong Kong film purist, and I was big on The Matrix and things like that, that fight, that Taken fight, and also the Bourne Identity fights drove me nuts. It drove me nuts because I couldn't follow what was going on. But what I didn't realize is that up until 2001, violence was very predictable in the minds of Americans and the minds of the world for the most part. After September 11, 2001, violence suddenly became unpredictable globally. And this, and I know this is heavy, but this is why Jason Bourne happened in 2002, right? Because up until that point, violence was predictable. After that, it's unpredictable. So now, there's this code now of action, right? The code before, predictable. Code after, unpredictable. So what is your hero? How does he interact with this? Your hero has to be improvisational. He has to grab anything off the shelf. As you see with Liam Neeson, he's grabbing this thing, he's grabbing this thing. It's a knife. You see a knife here. Oh, yeah, it's crazy, right? And you're just kind of like, you have images that are just kind of clashing. And that really, I think that really touched a lot of people, that kind of portrayal of action. And it's not because you can see it and it's beautiful. It's because that was the sort of perception of violence of practically the entire world at that point, because everybody experienced it at the same time because of mass media.
You get really excited about these big blockbusters and the films, and I know how much you really love it. You're at Comic-Con a few years ago, and your short film wins Best in Show. TIFF last year, the audience prize. That's extraordinary. Does that surprise you? Would you have seen that coming? I mean, you've kind of found yourself being this stunt professional with a bit of a filmmaking problem.
Yeah, I love it. I love that problem. It's a good problem to have.
How did that come about, and what's that transition like? Is that evolutionary, or is that a bit of experimentation? And where do you see your career going now that you've sort of tasted behind the camera with as much interest as the things you've done in front of the camera?
Wow, it's a big question. I think, I'm never looking for festival considerations. I'm always looking to the audience first, and that's how I got all my stripes, is by listening to the audience. And I would take the hate mail. I loved hate mail. Those are the emails that I would respond to, and I'd have a conversation with people. This guy would say, "You suck. You shouldn't be making movies." I go, "What didn't you like?" "Oh, it's the camera work and the scene sucked." "Oh, do you have an example of what would be better?" "Yeah, this one." "Oh, thanks." Cool. And I made a fan.
Right on.
So it was always about the audience, and now, the fan service and I think that any choreographer should be going this way too, is trying to understand the audience. They will react. They will either fill the seats or they won't. Understanding what the audience is going through, because a lot of the time, those of us in this industry, we live in a bubble. We're kind of like shaman in a weird way. And I don't mean that in purely sorcery terms. I mean just in the sense that a shaman has to kind of stand outside the culture and kind of look in and see what's going on. And it's the same thing with a fight choreographer. The guy that choreographs the warrior dance in the tribe, he kind of has to stand back and say, "Oh, yeah, we had the fight against these guys, and they remember the fight kind of looked like this. Let's reenact that so that people kind of get it out of their system," right? That guy is on the outside, and that's kind of where we have to be. We have to understand the audience. We can't hate them. We have to love them. We have to understand them. And we can't be, in the sense, it's like we can't totally separate ourselves. It affects us too. But the more that we understand the audience, the more that we listen to them, then that's the perfect product.
Well said. There's one last clip that I want to show, and I want to talk about choreography. I want to talk about that transition and where that is right now. I'd like to throw that clip up. particular sequence really resonates with you and you think it's important for a particular reason. I want you to tell us about that one.
Because that is the epitome of post-MMA choreography. And so right now...
And for MMA, for anyone...
Mixed martial arts, excuse me. So, you know, UFC and things like that. And like I said, the hick back in my hometown, he's fully aware of what all those moves are now. And he would look at that and he'd say, yeah, man, that's how you throw a hook punch, right? That's how you would get that stuff. But at the same time, it's not just about the moves, it's also that doesn't look choreographed. That's what's crazy about it. The guy that worked on that with Donnie Yen, John Salvidi, he has a way of understanding how to make a fight look like it's not choreographed.
Yeah, it's almost improvisational.
It looks improvisational
Yeah.
without them actually improvising anything. It's all planned out. That's the gold standard.
To all the aspiring filmmakers out there, the directors, the filmmakers, the storytellers, you've decided you want to put a fight scene in your film or in your show. What's the first step or the most important step? What are the do's and don'ts that any young filmmaker needs to be aware of? It's not an easy thing to do.
It's not. First of all, have a good story for your fight. Get as much story in there as you can. Please don't put in, and I'm speaking as a choreographer that you're going to hire. If your fight scene says, and they fight, and that's all we got, we're gonna be hammering you with questions all night about, like, well, who's winning? Like, where does it take place? You know, we know where it takes place, but is there a turn of events? Get the story in there. I mean, as a screenwriter, as a filmmaker, like, please have that stuff ready to go. And then you don't need to put in the moves necessarily, but have that story kind of blocked out as much as you can. Also, be open to ideas. The choreographer will often have great ideas about how to really expand that violent art for you. And get people that know what they're doing. It's not always the best idea to hire your friend to do a fight scene. It depends, right? Maybe your friend does know how, but it's always good to kind of team up with someone who knows action. There are a lot of talented folks here in Vancouver that can help you with that, and they can help you get stunt doubles, whatever it is. Do it the right way. You don't want a lawsuit on your hands. You don't want a broken nose.
No.
And you want a good-looking fight. That's the other thing too. Is like you need also a guy that can pull out that performance from people, or a woman that can pull those performances out. And then when you're editing it, it's going to be a joy rather than you won't be concerned about covering things up. You'll be wondering which shot to use. You know, that'd be a good problem to have.
That's good advice, and we can talk more about that in the AMA portion of our event tonight. Last thing, and let's go here because I think we've talked a lot about the industry and film and the evolution and sort of how you were inspired right through to the industry you've been a part of as it's evolved and grown. And then something really cataclysmic takes shape in the world of entertainment. Can we show the last video clip, please?
I originally came onto God of War because the animators for the game actually found me on YouTube. That kind of went viral, and then the animators saw it, and then they called me up directly. My name's Jacobus. I did the combat motion capture for Kratos in the new God of War. And this is how you fight like Kratos. I would describe Kratos' fighting style as one that's very direct, straightforward, and never stopping. We would never retreat in the game. He's the God of War. You'd never retreat as the God of War. You're always going to move forward. Every single move that I did had to have that full rage. When the team asked me to audition, instead of coming down to LA and auditioning in front of a committee, why don't I just go in my garage and do what I've been doing in these fighting games and just do a Kratos move list? I made a little move list for Kratos, where I do empty-handed combinations and I did the axe moves, Superman punches, Sparta kicks. We did a little bit of drop kicking. I had this training dummy that I beat up with the axe. It was kind of funny, you know? I put everything I had into it, you know, and I sent it over to them. Next thing I knew, they called me in to do a day of shooting.
Take two, Mark.
Motion capture plays such an important role because it allows the animators so much more movement to work with. When you capture the right movement, you don't have to pull the camera back into God's eye view anymore. You can bring the camera in. As a gamer, when you're playing a game and you're that close to the main character, you suspend disbelief so much more quickly when the character moves like a human. The body's a series of pulleys. You can't really fake it at a certain point, especially when it's so close to the camera. Because this is one of the coolest jobs a stuntman could ever ask for. I mean, coming in and playing the God of War himself, you know, and just doing axe moves all day. And yeah, it's exhausting, sure, it's 8 hours of work, but you know, a stuntman's body is built for this stuff. We really thrive when we're able to do full body moves like this. I would say that this sort of is the stuntman's dream.
Pre-order and get 3 shield skins for in-game.
PlayStation.
Video games have arrived. They've been around, you know, in this new format, maybe 5 to 10 years, where now we are really immersed in the visual worlds and universes, and everything you've been talking about in terms of film fighting is kind of out the window, because now nothing's impossible, right? I mean, how the hell do you go from trying to imagine improvisational with those MMA influences or the Asian influence of those films to God of War? I am a god and I can pull thunder and lightning from the sky, and what the hell? That's incredible. Is that easier or harder?
Well, no matter how you look at it, you still need a human body to do that stuff. And what they're always looking to do is make it look like they didn't animate it, right? They want it to look as human as possible. And when you put the controller in your hand, it gives you a little bit more feeling like you're in the character. But still, the goal is to generate as lifelike a movement as possible. But, like you said, you don't know where the camera is anymore, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, back in the, you know, when I was making movies, and I still do movies and film, but if I know the camera is going to be here, then I know I need to punch here. If the camera's there, I know I got to punch here. I know that if the camera's here, I need to react this way to the punch, things like that. But now in a video game, you have no idea where the camera's going to be. And odds are they're going to use animation to just get it there anyway. So in a sense, your move has to look good from every angle.
I'm a gamer. I'm a real fan. I have been for a long time. And like I said, it's really cool that I've played you. Is that the expression? I don't know. Mortal Kombat 11. Can we talk about that for a second? It comes out this week, next week, and you are 8 different characters. That's got to be hard. I mean, Raiden is really different from Kano.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. We might do them the same day too.
Not a lot of actors, you know, they can play different parts, but that's crazy. That's 8 different characters. How do you do that?
I have this thing in my head. It's like this little stick figure that I pay attention to when I'm doing mocap. So what'll happen is, you know, Carlos Pacino, who was the original Raiden, he'll show me the stance. He's like, your stance is like this, bro. I'm like, okay. And I'll look at him, and I'll go, okay. And I got it. And I got it for the whole day. And because it's like embedded now in that little stick figure in my head. And then he'll say, okay, now this is how he throws a punch. It's not like this, it's like this. And we kind of tool that, and I figure out kind of like the layer to put on that stick figure. And as I keep putting these layers on, I've kind of created a character in my mind that I can just keep referencing for the rest of the day. And I can just keep going back to that. I can't really do it by staring at someone and moving with them. I've never had that ability, right? That's why I'm a terrible dancer. Can't do it. Can't watch TV and copy it. It's gone. It's like I'm looking at a white wall. But if I can look at somebody doing a thing, I take it in, and then and I do it. And then if at break we're changing characters, okay, I just wipe it, and then I watch a new one. And it's kind of the same with feedback, right? So I mean, if you know, in God of War, if I throw a punch, and they say, and you know, they'll say like, yeah, but we really want that extension. So it's like, okay, so I'm going to put this new kind of layer on it where I just have to hit that pose. And I'll just apply that to everything else that I'm doing too. So it's like bang, and then bang, and it's all going to be kind of there. That's the layer that I put on top of it. And then bad animators, and I haven't worked with many bad animators or bad directors for that matter. None of them on God of War, I'll say that.
They will put lots of layers on, and they'll say like, it needs to be like this, and then your right foot needs to be like this, and your hip needs to be like that, and the next thing you know, I'm punching like this. And they're going, what happened? And I was like, you gave me 800 notes. Why don't we just go back to one note?
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Eric Jacobus.